Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Darling Inglis. Today, the rising cost of training takes centre stage. What does this Saturday's Tassie election mean for racing in the southern state? And we talked to renowned steward Fin Powrie about the strengths and weaknesses of Asian racing and the future of stewarding. In breeding and bloodstock, Japan is in the spotlight as the love affair for the progeny of Aussie mares continues, while we talk to Inglis's Angus Robertson about the current strength of the English digital market and looking forward to the sales season later this year and earlier next year. And in wagering, the challenges and opportunity of being a smaller player. We've got a wide remit today, Tim, as we often do. A couple of decent conversations with a couple of really interesting guests, but always great to have you here. Mate, let's talk about the cost of racing. You and I own horses, for right or for wrong. Share the costs. I got a message the other day from one of my trainers. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to put the training fees up now. My trainer, from her perspective, it's a very small amount, but there's the owners across Australia are raising this as an issue, Tim. And this data that was pulled out from Stable Financial is interesting. Basically, looking at the overall growth of the cost of racing. From your perspective, where does this sit in the importance of racing's issue and its future prosperity? Do you feel?
Well, it's just as prize money's gone up exponentially, so has the costs, and as we know, getting a good horse is not as easy as it looks to the outside. So if you're paying, if the horse is not paying its way, it's become very expensive. And I think it's all the extras that add up. You can't help vet fees or things like that, but the transport and and generally the trainer's only passing on those costs. So they're listening to some conversations with trainers only last week, on their daily training fees, they're losing money. They've got to, make it up. It is in transport, or they've got to win their 10% to make the business tick. So it's an expensive game racing. I don't have the answers to how to bring it down. I'm not sure you can, generally stable staff, stable hands, and those doing a lot of the legwork aren't overly well paid either. So you can't say, staffing, labour costs are too expensive. You need good staff, and that owners have the choice to go to shop around. There are cheapest, get trained in the bush or different things like that. But again, I guess the appeal of the leading stables is perception is more likely to have a good horse and racing in the better races, which is the aspiration of racing, isn't it?
Just going through that data, you can obviously look at the article on the Straight to have a look through it in detail, but for the top 10 trainers in both Victoria and New South Wales, training fees per day since 2023 have gone up sort of 7.5% to 8%. In Victoria, pre-training fees have gone up 18%, which probably raises a few alarms for me. Adjustment fees have gone up 17%. Chiropractic fees have gone up 19%. Dental fees have gone up 11%, and track fees have gone up so close to 2%. In New South Wales, 8% rise in training fees, 12% rise in pre-training fees, an 18% rise in adjustment fees, 2% rise in chiropractic fees, 12% for dentists, and 14% for track fees. Now, all those things and that's not the full set. There's a whole bunch of other fees that sit on top of that. And I think, the point about this discussion and the point of this analysis is not to point the fingers at trainers saying you're charging too much. It's actually just to recognise that it's an inflationary system. And prize money, increase in prize money, good and well, it's got a good horse, Jim. But you and I both know when you have a horse that's not going very well, you don't necessarily see the upside of that, and you still got the same costs. So I think, for the industry, it's something that needs to be addressed as a holistic level, not at a, trainers, you've got to do better level or whatever else. I think it probably needs to be looked at at a level where we're trying to, look at what's the best way of engaging owners and ensuring that either they don't reduce their shareholdings, which a lot are doing, or they don't get to a point where they exit the industry completely.
And we've spoken about this before, I guess, incumbent on PRAs, and for right or wrong, we seem to focus on Racing New South Wales because that's where they've upped the prize money the most. Arguably at the expense of facilities and therefore track fees and stable rents and things like that. Are they better off reducing stable rents or subsidising that to make training fees more affordable for owners? Again, they've obviously believe by and large prize money is the way to offset that. yeah, as I said, it's an expensive game, and buying the horses become more expensive. And again, this is not a pot at the breeders, because we've done analysis with the pinhooks and how expensive it is to breed a horse and get a horse to a sale, and quite often need 150,000 to break even, or 100,000 at least to break even. So it's not a pot at the breeders; it's just a very expensive game, and arguably maybe you can bring service fees down a fraction, but that's only going to offset it a little bit as well. It's just an expensive game, and you hope you get a good horse, and the thrill of that outweighs the cost.
Yeah, and it gets to a point where it's a game of enjoyment rather than a commercial venture for a lot of owners, and that's fine. But there gets a point where that enjoyment becomes less and less, more the bills pile up, and trainers are quite efficient at ensuring that they're not carrying the risk and the cost of that stuff. They are taking a lot of the risk to start with, so it's fair enough. But for me, it feels like the system isn't quite right at the moment. My concern is that more and more people are saying, they had that boom in owners probably 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe that's dropping off, or maybe they're dropping back, and maybe the rise with microshares. There's an article elsewhere the other day about microshares, and one of the major businesses having 55,000 clients. That's a lot of clients, Tim. So it's a fascinating one. We'll move on now to the Tasmanian election, something close to my heart. Maybe I'm one of the only racing journalists in Australia who is talking about this at the moment, but it is a significant moment for racing in Tasmania at the moment. We've raised a few issues about this before. On Saturday, Tasmania goes to the polls for the second time in 16 months. It was brought about by an early election. There's supposed to be 4-year electoral cycles. You wouldn't think so. Now, why significant is 2029, the funding deed, which is pretty much underwritten half the funding of Tas racing and racing in Tasmania for the past 20 years, comes to an end. That funding deed was founded on the sale of the Tasmanian tote back in 2009. Before that, Tasmanian racing largely sustained itself without government funding. Now, whether this is government funding or a washout from the Tasmanian tote sale is probably up for debate, and certainly those who are probably against racing and against certain aspects of racing are saying it's government funding, and others say, well, it's what the industry deserves given of the sale of the tote back in the day. Regardless of which, there's a political situation now where we've got 2 major parties, neither of which are likely to get a majority. Labor currently favourite to return to power for the first time in 11 years. Liberal will be battling under Jeremy Rockcliffe to sort of be able to form what they need to do. Now, same old stuff, same old political stuff, but the challenge for racing is, what does it mean for the funding deed? Now, both parties have said that they will work on the funding deed. The opposition leader, Dean Winter, who's probably the most likely premier at this stage, is a racing person and sort of gets it. He owns a few horses, and they have stated before, from their perspective, that they would look to work on the funding deed, as will Jane Howlett, who's been the racing minister down here, has also spoken about the need for that. The question is, the uncertainty still persists, Tim, and my concern is longer term what that means for racing if that doesn't get resolved, or if we get stuck in another political cycle. Now, complicating this is a large crossbench. 11 crossbenches currently in the current parliament, including 5 Greens. The Greens have a stated aim to end greyhound racing in Tasmania. Of course, Tasmania is governed as a tri-code state of racing, so therefore what happens in greyhound racing and harness racing affects what happens in thoroughbred racing. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. I think both major parties are committed to racing, which is a positive thing, but if they have to work with some crossbenches in order to get this across the line, get themselves into power, then it may change the perspective of things. And as I said, there's a stated aim by the Greens and a stated aim by several independents to end greyhound racing, and what they say is taxpayer funding of greyhound racing. Now, that to me is not correct, that term, but because of as I spoke to before, about the funding of the tote or whatever. We should see what pans out of on Saturday and how that plays forward. And joining us on Straight Talk is global racing executive Fin Powrie, one of the most experienced stewards in the world, in our humble opinion. Currently based in Korea, but Fin, you've had an amazing career across the world, and I've seen a lot of what global racing has to offer. Tim's been keen to get you on for a while to have a chat, so I'll pass the new ball over to Tim to start off with his interrogation of your quite amazing career, to be perfectly honest.
Sorry, I was just saying thank you for the invitation there, Bren, and it's great to be on the Straits. And as I say, I've had a lot of conversation with Tim, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat with you guys.
Sorry about that, but as I was saying, Fin, you sort of started off in your West Australian in WA and working the country meetings in the far northwest, and you've sort of progressed right through to Dubai and Greece and all these wonderful places. And as Bren said, you're in Korea currently.
Yeah, well, look, I've been blessed in terms of my career, that I have been from West Australia, and I got a cadetship back in the late 70s when things were considerably different to what they are nowadays. And I did my cadetship in Perth and then did the Northwest racing for several years. And then I went across to New South Wales, and I was based in Tamworth for a year and a half there. Went back to Perth, and then after a year and a half, I became chairman of Steward under some adverse conditions in the West. And I was a chairman there for 12 years, which was through a sort of a tumultuous period in terms of Australian racing. And then I was very, very lucky to be offered the position to go as the first professional steward to Dubai, where I had 5 wonderful years. And then it sort of kind of a snowballed from there. Or maybe, I don't know, snowball gets bigger or gets smaller, I'm not sure. But I rolled on from there.
And talking to different people that know you, Finn, there's many different ways, to be a steward, but you're also, I think, from what people tell me, you're a natural horseman as well, which I think endears you to the participants, that the fact you are a horseman as well as, can read a race and do all the stewarding things that role requires.
Well, look, the tag horseman is just sort of it's a bit like a title that one might get, but because there's many, many wonderful horsemen and horsewomen throughout Australia, and we pride ourselves on our horse people. Look, I think the essence of it is that I started this game racing was because I loved horses. I was involved in horses on cattle stations and various pursuits in racing, but and then I went into the racing with a sort of an open mind, but a horse mind, and felt like that. And to be quite candid with you, it's difficult for me sometimes to see young stewards over the years that they stand toe to toe with trainers that live and breathe with horses and have done since they were apprentice jockeys or very young people, and sort of argue about why a horse should be sent back to trials and so forth. Whereas I might never agree with maybe the leading trainer in any country or whatever, but when you stand toe to toe with them, they kind of probably realize that, well, he knows enough to be able to talk to me, whereas maybe the person that came out of the stock exchange or maybe from another forum, he probably doesn't quite understand the nuances of horses. We might never agree on a principle, but at least you know that the steward talking to them has an idea. And I've always sort of liked the idea of having stewards, and certainly a number of them on the panel, that were au fait with horses and knew what they're talking about.
Sort of, one of the aspects that's been amazing in the last, probably across your career, but the globalization of racing is one aspect, Finn, and obviously something you're quite passionate about. I mean, you worked in, Dubai and that area, I guess a long time ago now, given what's happened. I mean, the explosion of racing in the Middle East, we spoke to Stuart Bowman last week, and he said the Middle East from a bloodstock perspective is now the market for Europeans. I mean, how have you seen the development of that part of the world, and I guess its ongoing growing influence, on global racing?
Well, look, you're right. I went to Dubai in 2001, which was the very sort of the start of professional side of things related to that being the first professional steward and administrator in the Gulf. When I say administrator, there'd been Michael Osborne and a couple of others before, but in terms of a stipendiary steward, I was the first professional steward in the Gulf. Now that was only 24 years ago. So the thing is that the exponential growth of the industry there has brought about, obviously, its challenges, but it's brought about a considerable focus. And one of the greatest focuses, of course, is the amount of money that's available for horses. And the predominance of dirt probably just makes it a little bit less global in terms of the desire for, say, the Australian or New Zealand horse, or indeed the better horses out of Hong Kong, albeit that Romantic Warrior went and performed. He was ambidextrous, of course, as we've seen. So it's got a particular position within the world. And one of the things, obviously, because of the climate, it shuts down during the hot period, other than, say, TAFE in Saudi Arabia. But the majority of the racing in the Gulf closes down. So it kind of fits into the European winter whereby there's an opportunity, a secondary kind of period for the European horse. So it integrates quite well, because basically it always amazed me in some form that the European, and particularly the English system, would run their flat races, and then all the flat jockeys basically just have the winter off. And it was kind of a weird sort of way of things happening. And then obviously in comes the all-weather tracks and so forth. But I think the Gulf has got a very significant, a unique position. And one of the great aspects of it is that because of the amount of money that the passion of the monarchs over there, and the sheikhs and His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum put in place initially, and his passion was what drove it and still drives it. It's the same in terms of quite a few of the Gulf countries. So whilst that's maintained, I think there'll always be a very, very significant and vibrant racing there, albeit that it doesn't quite always sit with what might be seen as a more commercial racing aspect in Australia.
And Finn, you've obviously very experienced in Asia as well. You've worked in Malaysia, and you're obviously in Korea at the moment. Sort of Asian race has been a bit of a state of flux in some jurisdictions. Obviously Macau's no longer, Singapore ended. Asia racing to certainly Australasia is seen as very important as an export market and different things. Where do you see that continent going in terms of racing, and can it, outside Hong Kong, can it progress, I guess, in some of those countries?
Well, look, when you're talking Asia, you're obviously including Japan as well, and then you've got models like the Hong Kong Jockey Club that is to be applauded, is to be copied, but it, unlike say the Australian commercial side of things, it's a very small industry, and it encapsulates it for their wagerers and their punters. I think the Asian psyche is that they do like to bet, and that they like the opportunity to be in a position to bet. And so it's got its unique challenges in terms of what might be issues of, say, horse welfare. And I say that without being pointed at all, but whereas the focus in, say, Australia with such an extensive after career issue of show jumping and cross country and dressage and all those things that the secondary markets that the horses go onto, and even the horse that fails at Flemington, he's in a position he can go into the provincials, and then he can go further afield and go into and maybe end up at Stony Creek Cup one day. But so there's that, whereas some of those places like Malaysia now only has Selangor and the Perak Turf Club at Ipoh because Penang demised. So it's obviously an issue that's of significance related to the community that brings these things about, in terms of what happened in Singapore and in terms of also what happened in Macau. So I can sort of see it happening further afield yet again in Malaysia, whereby one of the clubs possibly will strengthen considerably, and the other club is probably battling to survive. But whilst there's the opportunity for them to get gambling and to channel it back into racing rather than sort of have it flitter away, which is another topic I imagine we'll be talking about, I think that some of those places like Selangor Turf Club will remain very, very strong. And obviously the Korean aspect is a strong market for their local people here. Japan stands alone, of course. And then Hong Kong is just basically the pinnacle of what one might consider as being global racing.
The evolution of technology, Finn, it's something we'll get into in a minute. We'll talk about the possibility of remote stewarding, but I wanted to touch first on cover the challenges around technology and around about the growth of technology in the market. First of all, is there more pressure on stewards, do you feel, given the concept of greater distribution of vision? Social media has changed things around. People can share vision quite easily, all that type of stuff. How has that shaped, I guess, that notion that everything is being watched, shaped the way that stewards do their job across the world, do you feel?
Well, I think one way I like to answer that question, Bren, is to go back to when I started, and we had a 16 mil black and white spool that came flying in And as a cadet steward, I had to reel it up and then run through and then make sure I pressed the shutter when we stopped, when somebody's whip was in the air and so forth, that I didn't burn the tape and everything. So nowadays, we've come to the situation where we have AI technology and everybody around the world, you have slow motion replays of everything, for in-depth analysis before the jockeys even get off the horse. So that dovetails and sort of plays into the hands very much of the social media side of the community, whereby they have access and can comment on anything that happens. So the question, to answer the particular question related to the pressures on the stewards, the essence of how you do the job doesn't change. What does change is probably the fact that because people have more access to information, which you in latter days had, all of a sudden it becomes a more significant focus, that possibly there's a greater need for justification so that you can demonstrate something with a video, because to say, well, I know it happened and, I was watching and I saw it happen, that's probably not quite good enough nowadays, because there's going to be drone footage and there'll be other jockey cam footage and other types of footage that are utilized whereby somebody said, no, that's not quite right. That didn't happen at all. You see, so it puts quite a little bit of pressure onto the stewards in doing that. I think that the stewards need to be very careful, though, that they don't become knee-jerk and reactive to what punters will do. Because if you imagine in any objection, that they call them objections in other parts of the world, but in Australia, you refer to them as the protest. With a protest, there's always at least two sides to the argument, and you can guarantee that if, even though one is the 6-4 favourite and the other one's 100-1, you're going to upset somebody by making a decision, because the decision is not going to just be, let's sort of split the prize money and everybody go home and everybody be happy. It's a situation whereby you're making a decision, and and the gravity of their particular situation is probably quite often increased because of the players in it. And if it's the 6-4 favourite versus the 7-1 chance that's been backed from 20s, then there's a lot of people on both horses, and there's a lot of people are looking very closely at it, and it brings about a greater focus. And basically, like we had in sort of last year's Kentucky Derby, when the Japanese horse ran third, the Forever Young, and there was quite a significant incident there. And I personally, I don't go out on a limb saying this, but I've said it before, but I think the stewards made a mistake in not inquiring into it. And the reason I say that is not to say we will relegate the winner, and not to say that you should have done this, you should have done that, because I didn't hear any of that evidence. But what they should have done is that they should have given the punters that had backed those horses and the wagerers and the connections the opportunity to be heard. And they said, no, we've looked at it. You might not agree with us, but result stands. And I think that's the obligation of stewards, irrespective of where you are, and always, and you say it's always without fear or favour and unbiased and everything. These are sort of catchphrases that stewards use, but the reality is that's the way it has to be.
Then there's probably a recent example of the heightened pressure on stewards or racing jurisdictions through social media, and that's Lyle D'Souza, and I don't want to prejudice the case. The inquiry is still ongoing, but it was dislodged out of the gates on a hot amazing favourite, but was favourite. You've worked at Selangor, and Lyle D'Souza. As I said, not prejudicing the inquiry, so to speak, but it just highlights the amount of pressure and where it's that incident went global.
Yes, and that's exactly right. That was a very good example of social media taking something and running with it. Now, the thing is, this is that the case is sub judice, so we won't go there in relation to that. But as a generality, in talking about the sort of the incident whereby a rider comes off the odds-on favourite, that attracts a great deal more attention than maybe in race one, whereby the 100-1 chance stumbled and somebody came off and wasn't injured, and there wasn't a great deal as an issue. but I think again, the steward's challenge there is to go through the case itself, just systematically. Obviously, the opportunity to analyze betting patterns, analyze the horses' sort of past conduct and so forth and so on, and then obviously they would listen to the rider. So, it's quite a good case. There's been. And I'm not saying blown out of proportion, but it's being elevated considerably because of the nature of the gambling figure on the horse, and what might be considered as a dramatic incident. But that's bear in mind that it's sub judice, and we'll leave it to the stewards of the Selangor Turf Club to deal with that at due course, of course.
Just sort of moving onward from that, in terms of how you do your job of monitoring what's going on, how any steward does their job, obviously there's a regulated market which you can assess what's going on, whether it be a locally based tote, or in Australia we talk about the corporate bookmaking environment, or wherever else it is. In Hong Kong, it's obviously the Hong Kong Jockey Club tote, whatever else. But there's obviously a broader unregulated market, and that's continuing to grow. It has always been relatively strong within Asia, to be perfectly honest, but how much analysis can you do as a steward of what's going on in those markets? And how much do you do in terms of what's influencing stuff that's probably not immediately evident if you just look at the local betting market?
Well, look, it's a very good question. It's a very strong question. It's very pertinent to today's racing world. I think the question would probably be divided into regions, because if you consider that the Gulf being an Islamic and Muslim state, where gambling is not permitted, there isn't such a focus on that particular aspect of racing. But let's move into the Asian side of things, and particularly maybe even the Antipodean racing systems. There's memorandums of understanding in place with a lot of the corporate bookmakers and those that are not necessarily sort of readily available at first glance to the racing administrators, and particularly the stewards and the integrity branches and so forth. But the one that we're talking about, there was considerable illegal gambling, and James Portis, who's the chair of the anti gambling and betting corruption issue coming out of the Asian Racing Federation, he quotes some amazing figures in terms of the leakage to the industry in terms of the illegal gambling from various countries, and some of the countries that you think, do they even exist as countries? But they're places where they're gambling. Now, your question related to how stewards deal with the issues, that the majority of the civilized, the sophisticated areas have got good access to the sort of the trends that are available. Not necessarily what is actually the specifics, but the trends available in terms of is this the short price, or I should really talk in terms of the $1.50 horse rather. Is there a weight of money being laid on this? Are the tickets being eaten, which is a quaint phrase that they utilize in Asia, on the horse? And if so, the negative aspect of that, how it sort of travels down. We got a lot of information in Malaysia of horses that were suspect in that particular regard. We did a lot of work in terms of our speed maps beforehand in relation to putting pressure onto the trainers if they had two horses in one race, or indeed there was a last start winner that was dropping back in distance, how they were going to be ridden, obviously maybe the barrier drawn, what sort of came into. So we put a lot of pressure onto the trainers and the connections, at least, of what was going to happen. That doesn't really mean that it makes anything else necessarily happen, but it also does put the focus onto the jockeys to say, listen, we got an issue here and we need to know. And then obviously the stewards have their old tried, and not necessarily true, but it's a tried method of just telling the jockey, look, we understand that this horse is very, very easy in the market, and you're being watched. It's as simple as that. And and then you've got obviously the after race review system and that, but in saying that also, not always the full amount of evidence comes to you in terms of how much money has gone on these horses. And as you guys would know better than I do, that the movement of big money is often in the last 90 seconds,
Finn, one of the things you're passionate about and been investigating, and we've seen starting to come into place in Australia, it's certainly New South Wales and WA, I believe, is remote stewarding, and that's where that stewarding could head in the future. How do you see it playing out, and why is that a good thing?
Well, look, if you use the word remote stewarding, you say, okay, let's take the steward away from the racecourse. It flies in the face of what I just said about me standing toe to toe and talking to somebody on a personal level about a horse. And it kind of plays into the hands of Gil McLaughlin in terms of rationalising the on-course race caller. And Josh Fleming is now a sort of country racing administrator rather than a great listenable race caller. So don't get me wrong when I say this. The remote stewarding has got the opportunity, or gives the opportunity to stewarding panels, because stewarding isn't such a glossy job as it used to be, because it's more mundane, the amount of travel, the amount of racing that's on and so forth. It's less sort of glamorous than it might have sort of been seen in those days. So what sort of the remote stewarding principle, and for those that might not know what it might be, is that obviously there would be stewards, or maybe two stewards, which fall short of a quorum at a race meeting in, say, a country region. And then there would be an augmented panel of stewards that would sit in the centre. And if we use, say, Western Australia, for example, you might consider send one steward to Port Hedland with an offsider up there that's a resident in the town. And then you'd have two stewards sitting back at Belmont during the winter down there, and they would be looking exactly the same video footage and everything that would be cited on course, albeit that they were sitting at Belmont Park Racecourse. They would have a video link up to the interview of jockeys, interview of trainers, and anything else that was sort of available to be broadcast. That doesn't say that they can go out the mountain enclosure and check lugging bits and so forth, or they're not going to walk up to the 600-metre mark and dig their heel in and say, "Oh, we've got a little problem here." So that's why you need somebody on. You need somebody on the ground, obviously. But the remote stewarding gives quite a few good advantages, to the extent that it can satisfy the quorum issue very, very easily and very quickly. You can obviously put greater expertise into areas that might sort of fall short. If you're sending a junior steward to a country race meeting, he could be backed up by two considerably senior stewards in the central. And I think that they call it the virtual boardroom in South Africa, and I think they call it the bunker in Western Australia. And Steve Ralton's I think he calls Steve Ralton up in New South Wales, I think he might call this the control centre. But so, it has a real position within racing, in my mind, in terms of looking after the industry, in terms of good stewarding, good level stewarding, but also burnout of stewards, travel costs, some of those things as well. So I think there's a considerably significant position for it.
Ben, we've covered a fair bit of ground, and we'd love to cover a lot more ground, but we'll let you go for now. We really appreciate your time and your insight into the global racing, global stewarding is very valuable to our audience who are clearly very interested in what goes on, not just within the the states of Australia, but beyond that. So we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Bren, and thank you, Tim, for being a part of the Straits. It's good. We enjoy it every day up here in Korea, just reading through all the messages and everything. And I'm glad to have been able to be part of it.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley, who's won 3 of Europe's biggest stallion-making races. Native Trail. He mixed in all the right circles. He won the National Stakes just like Dabawi and Daniel Dancer. Took out the Dewhurst like Too Darn Hot and Petitubo, and claimed the Irish 2000 Guineas like Kingman and Jabawi. An unbeaten champion at 2, a classic winning 3-year-old, and a superb specimen from the same sire line as I'm Invincible. Native Trail returns to Darley, New South Wales this season. Racing class becomes breeding class. And at $27,500, including GST, is an opportunity not to be missed. Breeding and bloodstock news now, Tim. And this week we saw the JHRA sale, a tremendous result overall in Japan record results overall. And the enthusiasm for Japanese racing at that top end is quite remarkable. The progeny of Australian mares taking centre stand. The Machine Colt topped the yearling sale, $4.3 million, while Yankee Rose's Colt by Saturnalia sold for $3.2 million. We had also the first foal out of Golden Slipper winning filly by Kazuna. The first foal out of Byburn by Kazuna sold for $3.3 million. So some great results. We've seen those results over the years, and probably not surprising, Tim, that the Australian mares continue to resonate really well, don't they?
Well, that overall sale was quite phenomenal. Satomi Oka, who's a Sydney-based Japanese bloodstock agent, and she texted me and said it was just crazy. The 1 million was now 2 million. It's just, an up 13% year on year on a record sales. Just demand at that top end, and it is, from my understanding of it, that select sale is probably like the top end of Easter and the top end of Magic Millions. So it's not the whole industry, but it is just that demand, and the Australian mares from small numbers just seem to click with those bloodlines, whether it's the stamina into the speed mares, just seem to work, and Machine from way back is still producing good horses, obviously topping the sale, as you said, and now Fireburn, sold for multiple millions off the track privately by deal brokered by Will Johnson to Katsumi Yoshida. First foal 3.3 million. So I think demand for those mares, Australian mares, will continue. It has become far more competitive with obviously the Yearlongs and Coolmores snapping up a lot of the better ones here, but they'll still pick around the edges trying to find the suitable mares that probably are winning, Coolmore Classics and, those good mile mares with a bit of speed will seem to suit Japan.
Yeah, it is quite remarkable. And the bigger players at that top end of the market are all local players. We saw John Stewart get in there, we saw the Hong Kong Jockey Club get involved, but primarily we're talking about the bigger players, including, one of the guy that's the brains behind Umamasane, which is the massive, Japanese combination, hard to explain, between manga and racing and gaming and all this sort of stuff, this sort of nexus of racing stuff, which probably a lot of us in the rest of the world look at and shake our heads and don't get our heads around, but it's huge over there. And this concept of this enthusiasm for these champion horses continues to roll on. So it's the Japanese market. It's a very, very different market to where we're at. And you're right. I mean, the fact that they're still selling foals while they're next to their mares, it's an interesting, the way that they do it. It's not the only sale for the year. And a lot of the better progeny are retained as well too, Tim. So it's interesting from that perspective. We've got so many Australian mares over there now, like high quality mares. A lot of them aren't even getting progeny into these sales. They're being retained or sold in other sales. So Amphitrite had a good result. We had Single Gaze. There was a couple others as well that, had excellent results. And across time, I think the Liberty Island aspect, the daughter of Yankee Rose, faded unfortunately, but she was a champion horse. She has fueled that sort of desire for Australian mares, the progeny of Australian mares, and I think that's probably changed things as well. And joining us on Straight Talk is Inglis bloodstock consultant Angus Robertson. Great to have a chat, Gus. Let's start with Inglis Digital. Another fantastic result yesterday, gross of $7 million, I think the fourth biggest ever Inglis Digital sale, which is a great result for that. Led by, obviously Godolphin selling a stack of horses through there, but hey, we're in the middle of winter and people aren't scared of buying horses, are they?
Thanks, Bren and Tim, and great to be on the show this morning. We were delighted with the sale yesterday, and as you mentioned, obviously pushing past that $7 million barrier was a big achievement. It's one of the biggest sales we've had in recent times, obviously, as you said, with big drafts from the like of Godolphin, quite a large dispersal from Hopetown Farm in Queensland, and then obviously just that regular thoroughfare of bloodstock trade that has become so synonymous with the Inglis Digital brand. But to gross the fourth highest total sale since its inception was pretty fantastic. And I suppose it's just a testament to the work that all the team do, from the digital staff right through to our IT, our marketing, our bloodstock department, which obviously serves the platform for buyers and sellers as well. So it's certainly a team effort, and it's come a long way since it started back in the early teens.
What
Yeah,
was
and
interesting to me, Gus, was the top lot from Godolphin and also Spacewalk that Australian Bloodstock bought are both going to WA, which probably points to the health of that state's racing industry at the moment and the returns that they can get through prize money and just a little bit lesser grade, I guess, better placed for some of those horses.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've seen horses off Inglis Digital that have gone and raced in WA. I mean, you look at a horse like Western Empire, who was already a Group 1 winner in that jurisdiction, and I think was picked up for around about 150,000 off the top of my head by an owner over there. And the horse has since gone on and won over $1 million in prize money since being purchased. So, it's the digital platform is no stranger to horses going on to success over in the West. And even a horse like Port Lockroy or Light Infantryman, who have both had shares sell through the digital platform prior to going on to win Group 1s over there as well. So, it's not hard to see why the owners from that jurisdiction are queuing up for these good racehorses.
Yeah, from what you're saying before, like I said, the Inglis platform has become development there for Inglis Digital to move on to the sort of a new. And Angus, what sort of innovation is Inglis working on the digital space? I believe there's a new platform coming up for the next sale.
Yeah, so we're currently in the rolling out phase of our new Inglis Digital platform. Obviously, as with anything of this nature and magnitude, it's important to always keep improving the site. And whilst the current platform, as it stands today, has been very good in growing from inception, we're always looking for ways to improve the platform. And it was ultimately decided that by launching a new site and platform, we could keep making those small 1% changes and having the capability to make those changes. Obviously, there'll be plenty of teething as we move on to the new site, but yeah, we're really confident that it'll continue to make Inglis Digital. I mean, what has been so great about it is for people to keep that volume of stock and provide that high quality bloodstock service, which it's been so good at. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to rolling that out for the July late sale later this month.
Gus, from a live sale point of view, it's not really that far away, and the ready to race sale, the 2-year-old sale, will be up and running and held in sort of early October.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. I mean, it's funny, there's not really much of an off season now with these digital sales every fortnight. And as you mentioned, yeah, with the live sales, we've obviously got the 2-year-old sale rolling back around. It's been a great 12 months for graduates out of that sale. Obviously, the filly that topped it last year at $1 million, Signature Scent, has now won 2 from 2 and looks like she's quite smart. Also, another graduate title fighter by Lean Mean Machine won a stakes race at Flemington in the past couple of months. So it's good to see that the graduates of that sale are continuing to raise the bar. And I mean, it's frequently dubbed the most progressive 2-year-old sale in Australasia, and the metrics certainly attest to that, but also the graduate success, both domestically and also abroad in places like Hong Kong. So we're very excited about the way the catalogue's coming together.
It's a busy time for the bloodstock team regardless. You don't get much time to rest. No doubt you'll be out doing yearling inspections ahead of the 2026 yearling sales season. You know, the yearling don't turn yearlings until a couple of weeks' time, but yeah, you guys are pretty much on the ground throughout to early spring and throughout that time, looking at these horses, assessing them coming forward and sort of building out those catalogues for next season, Angus.
Yeah, absolutely, Bren. I mean, we're obviously in the process at the moment of collating stock lists from all the farms and as you mentioned, planning those inspection trips. We'll be out on properties from as early as the end of this month, working right through August and into September. So getting out plenty of feet on the ground and looking at plenty of young horses and looking forward to seeing the stock ahead of next year's sales. As you can imagine, it's no small task trying to place a couple of thousand horses across each of Classic, Premier and Easter. So yeah, we'll certainly have our work cut out for us, but it's an exciting time. I mean, you're obviously going out and looking for the next generation of superstars, and working with so many of our valued clients on those properties as well is also very rewarding.
Angus, thanks so much for your time and all the best for the upcoming season.
No worries at all, guys. Thanks very much for having me on.
Finally, this week in wagering, which had a lot about the bigger players in this game, but shout out to the smaller operators, of which there are many. Warwick Bar ran a story today on the decision by SA harness authorities to backflip on a decision to impose an additional fee, which would have impacted smaller operators. And in fact, many of those smaller corporate operators who opted out of fielding on South Australian harness, they now decided to go back into it again. Small little microcosm story, not necessarily about harness racing in South Australia, but more about the smaller players and how they're more affected by the fee structure. We saw that a similar story sort of evolved out of the Racing Australia field fees and then the way that was structured a couple of months ago too, Tim. It's an interesting one because we talk about the big players and their importance to the market, and they do dominate the market. If you talk about the big 3 or 4, we're talking, well in excess of 85% of the market. But the small guys are important, and I guess it's important that we have that diversity at that lower level of those corporate bookmakers, Tim.
Yeah, a lot of the smaller, not all of them, but there's a portion of those, say the 50 to the 100th corporate bookmaker who are also family run or they're on-course bookies. They go to the, as well, and they're, in order to survive and wanting to continue that pastime, they've gone online. And I think that's pivotal that they can survive for the on-course racing as well. That experience of going to the track and seeing the bookies, even now, is still something unique about Australian racing, I think, and the UK, of course, but seeing that, the bookies and what they're doing, it adds atmosphere. And so we need those smaller bookies to survive online as well. And it shows that it was only a small fee they were considering. I think it was $2,000. So it wasn't a lot, but just shows how finer margins there are playing those smaller markets on, SA harness racing in this example that, another $2,000 just doesn't make it viable.
Yeah, and the need to have that the smaller guys to be able to bet on everything is actually really important because they need to be able to compete with the bigger corporate bookmakers that they're not offering on these other markets. And look, there are challenges with the smaller bookies, don't get me wrong, and there are various other things going on there, and some of the small white label players sort of driving various different brands or whatever else. But I think it's important, and the 100-odd corporate bookmakers we have in Australia, it's a long tail, but I think it is important to have options out there, especially as we see across the board in other aspects we talk about, whether it be in breeding or whether it be in training or whatever else. The small guys are being run out of town. Diversity is important in any financial ecosystem. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, be it on Spotify, Apple, Podbean, watching us on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, give us a like. Send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au. We've had a few emails to come through in the last couple of weeks, and we'll, at some stage in the future, as you mentioned, we might do a Q&A answer for our audience out there that sort of talk through the major issues. Yeah, thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.